After the lamps are lowered, the room keeps its quiet shape. The work of medicine is often remembered through discoveries, but it was also made from listening, waiting, measuring, carrying, cleaning, and recording. Tonight, on a hospital ship at midnight, the history stays close to those ordinary details. In a sick room, the bed was only the center of a wider order. A chair waited by the pillow. A basin stood ready. A pitcher, a folded towel, a notebook, and a small clock made the room into a place that could be watched through the night. Someone had to open the window, close the curtain, shake out the linen, and keep the lamp from guttering. Someone had to know when to speak softly and when to leave the room silent. Long before a hospital ship carried such work across the water, care was built from these small acts of attention. It lived in the hand that lifted a cup, the eye that checked a face, and the page that held the day together after memory had gone thin. For much of history, illness stayed close to home. The sick person remained in a room while the house changed around that room. The best bed might be moved near the fire in winter or near a window when the air was warm enough to let in light. Meals were carried carefully. Water had to be fetched and replaced. Cloths had to be rinsed and dried. A warming pan, a kettle, a stool, a shelf for bottles, a basket for clean linen, and a tray for bowls all became part of the same domestic landscape. The kitchen could not remain only a kitchen, and the bedroom could not remain only a bedroom. The whole household took part. A cough at night changed the rhythm of sleep for everyone. A weak voice from the next room changed the way doors opened, the way footsteps sounded on stairs, the way a family spoke at table. There was nothing theatrical about that labor. Its power came from repetition. Fresh water, a swept floor, a quiet room, a shaded lamp, a blanket lifted and set down again. The sick room was a place where ordinary life had to slow itself and stay precise. That precision was not the work of one person alone. Family members, neighbors, hired attendants, and household servants all carried pieces of it. One person might sit through the dark hours, another might bring broth from the kitchen, another might carry a message to a doctor, an apothecary, or a relative down the road. In some houses, there was a drawer or cabinet with bottles, papers, and folded notes kept together in case they were needed again. A key might hang on the wall for that drawer, just as a key might guard the pantry or the chest where linens were stored. The domestic world of care spread outward from the bed into the stairwell, the yard, the gate, the street, and the market. A neighbor could arrive with firewood, clean cloth, or news. A letter might be read twice because it had to be explained to someone too tired to follow it on the first pass. The patient's room was never truly separate from the life around it. It was a small center of gravity, and the household adjusted to it. That is one reason bedside care endured for so long. It fit into the structures people already had. A table, a chair, a basin, a shelf, a blanket, a door left ajar, a voice kept low. As cities grew and more formal institutions took shape, they did not erase those habits, they arranged them. Hospitals, infirmaries, and charitable wards took the scattered labor of the household and set it in rows. Beds lined the walls, corridors created routes for water, linen, meals, and paper. A register sat on a desk near the entrance because names and notes had to be easy to find. Cabinets and shelves held what the room needed. Washrooms, laundry spaces, kitchens, and storage closets stood behind the visible front of the ward, because the visible order depended on an invisible routine of cleaning and carrying. The room itself became a tool. If the floor was clean, if the sheets were folded, if the windows were opened when the weather allowed, if the laundry moved out and back in a dependable cycle, then the ward could do its work. The same task repeated from bed to bed, a tray carried in, a dish carried out, a note written down, a blanket adjusted, a basin emptied, a name checked against the book. This was how institutions made care teachable. A novice could learn by watching how the room was kept. A patient could depend on a pattern that did not have to be invented every hour. The hospital was not a break from bedside care. It was bedside care made public, organized, and repeatable. Older bedside care also depended on a kind of reading. Before machines filled a room, the room itself was an instrument, the angle of a body against the pillow, the speed with which a cup was emptied, the way sleep came in fragments, the sound of breathing in a still room, the look of a face in lamplight, the hesitation before someone tried to sit up or turn over. All of these were part of the record. An experienced attendant could learn a great deal by staying still and paying attention. There was no need for drama in that work. The skill lay in restraint. A person had to remain long enough to notice the small changes that later became important. A notebook mattered because memory blurs when the day is long. One line could keep the hour, the meal, the better moment, the worse moment, the return of appetite, the loss of strength, the arrival of a visitor, the hour when the room became quiet again. Paper gave the sick room a second kind of endurance. It kept the day from disappearing into impressions. It also kept the next person from having to guess. A line in a ledger, a note on a page, a mark beside a name. These were all part of the bedside habit of making care continuous. The body changed from hour to hour, and the page gave that change a shape that could be followed. Ships asked for the same discipline, but under harsher conditions. A vessel rolls. It creaks. It shifts with weather, current, and load. Nothing stays where it is unless it is stored well. Water has to be guarded. Lamps have to be trimmed. Rope must be coiled. Equipment has to be tied down. The deck is never still, and a passage that is wide enough in port can feel narrow once the sea begins to move. People already living on a ship understand routine in a way that land sometimes forgets. There are watches, bells, signals, meals, logs, and inspections. The chart table has its place. The mess has its place. The galley has its place. The locker has its place. The berth has its place. That order makes ordinary life possible at sea, and it also makes care possible when someone becomes ill. A hammock can stand in for a bed. A spare cabin can become a place of recovery. A locker can keep supplies that on shore would sit in a cabinet or storeroom. A ship already knows how to organize movement. That is why it can be taught to organize stillness as well. Illness asks the vessel to become gentler. The challenge is not to stop the sea, which cannot be done, but to create a small protected order inside the larger motion. The need for that order became more urgent whenever people had to be moved away from danger or across long distances. Rivers, harbors, coastal routes, and wartime transports all carried the sick and injured long before anyone gave the work a dedicated name. A boat could be the quickest road when land routes were broken, crowded, or too slow. Yet water also made the old bedside work harder. A person could not be left to slide with every motion. Blankets had to be folded and refolded so they stayed clean. Stretchers and cots had to be carried carefully through doorways and across decks. A note had to travel with the patient, because the next pair of hands needed to know what had already happened. The housebound logic of care had to become portable. One person's room might be represented by a mattress in a corner, a screen, a curtain, a sheet, a basin, and a chair. Another person's room might be no more than a cleared space below deck. But the principle stayed the same. The patient needed a stable place, even if that place had to be made from whatever the voyage allowed. The sea did not invent the need for healing. It forced healing to become compact, exact, and mobile. Out of that pressure came the hospital ship as a practical answer. The idea sounds simple, but it solved a hard problem. If a patient must travel, can the care travel too? A ship built for that purpose could be arranged so that the work of the room survived motion. Beds could be placed where they were easiest to watch. Clean linen could be kept close. Supplies could be stored where they were easy to reach. Water, food, paper, and tools could be organized in a way that made the next hour predictable. Spaces for washing, resting, writing, and carrying could be separated without becoming isolated from one another. The ship could act like a house, a ward, and a storehouse all at once. It could receive the ill, keep them under steady observation, and move them on when their condition or the situation required it. That was not a glamorous promise. It was a promise of steadiness. A hospital ship did not exist to be admired. It existed to make room for weakness without letting the sea turn weakness into chaos. Its usefulness came from humility. It accepted that a moving vessel could still be a room, and that the work of care could be gathered into a hull if the hull was organized with enough discipline. The records mattered just as much as the beds. A moving medical space needs names, counts, times, and notes. The register tells who is aboard. The log tells where the ship is. The supply list tells what is still in the lockers. The linen count tells what can be changed and what must be washed. The chart on the desk tells where the ship stands on the water, but the page beside it tells where the patient stands in the day. Those papers may seem dry, yet they keep the structure together. On land, a hospital can depend on streets, neighboring buildings, outside deliveries, and a fixed staff. At sea, every one of those supports has to be recreated inside the vessel. That means paper, routine, and repetition. It also means a kind of quiet authority. A medical space has to be legible at a glance. A lamp over a desk, a clean corridor, a labeled cabinet door, a folded stack of linens, and a shelf kept free for the next need all signal that the place is ready to receive care. The same is true of the chart table and the logbook. The ship and the room belong together because both depend on order that can be seen, checked, and repeated. Without that order, the night would spread everywhere. With it, the night can be held at the edge of the bed and kept there. At night, all of those habits become easier to hear. A corridor that seems ordinary in daylight takes on a different sound after dark. Footsteps soften. Doors close more carefully. A page turns with care. A lamp is shaded. A cup is set down without a rattle. Outside, the water meets the hull with the same steady insistence, and the ship answers with its own low creak. The people keeping watch are not hunting for spectacle. They are preserving a pattern. They check the berth, the blanket, the note, the next round of water, the next line in the book, the next face on the list. This is where the old bedside habit meets the logic of seafaring. Both depend on wakefulness without panic. Both depend on attention that can be repeated without becoming careless. Both depend on a room that stays organized even when the world outside is moving. The midnight hour does not change the task, it only makes the task more audible. A quiet ship can sound almost like a house that has learned to float, and a house at rest can sound almost like a vessel holding its course. So the origins of a hospital ship are not only maritime, they are domestic, institutional, and deeply ordinary. They live in the basin by the bed, the linen closet in the corridor, the register on the desk, the chart beside the lamp, the narrow passage in a ward, the locker on a deck, the line of a logbook, the fold of a blanket, the bucket of water carried carefully from one place to another. The hospital ship grew out of the oldest lesson in medicine, that a sick person needs not just knowledge, but arrangement, not just intention, but a room that can keep the work. When that room had to float, the same lesson had to survive the tide. By midnight, the lesson was still there, quiet and exact, moving with the ship as if the sea itself had agreed to keep watch. The logbook line was only the start. Beyond it, the ship opened into a chain of rooms, each one made to do an ordinary task well enough that the whole vessel could become a place of care. A hospital ship had to turn space into order. It had to make a bed steady when the sea was not steady, make a doorway useful when it rocked, make a table stay useful while the hull moved beneath it. In that sense, the room was never just a room. It was a promise that the work would not be scattered. It would be gathered, set down, checked, and gathered again. A bed held the center of that promise. Around it were the small things that keep a day from coming apart: a folded blanket, a cup, a basin, a tray, a chair that could be moved in a narrow turn, a curtain that gave a little privacy without pretending the patient was anywhere else. Every object had to stay in its place or return to it quickly. On land, a nurse can trust a floor that does not rise and fall. At sea, the room itself must help. A tray needs a lip, a shelf needs a latch, a lamp needs a secure mounting. A blanket needs to be folded so it can be reached without searching. Nothing is accidental in a floating ward. That is why the cabinet matters as much as the bed. In a hospital ship, the cabinet is not decoration. It is a compact arrangement of readiness. Drawers keep the folded things. Compartments keep the small tools. Labels keep one row from becoming another row. Paper packets, linen, instruments, and supplies are kept in the logic of use, not in the logic of display. A person who opens such a cabinet is not looking for beauty. They are looking for the next minute of the day. The cabinet says that the day has been planned in advance, even if the weather has not. Water has a different kind of authority aboard ship. Water is everywhere at sea, but the useful water is the water that can be controlled, carried, warmed, poured, and saved. A basin on a hospital ship is a simple thing, but it carries a heavy share of the routine. Hands are washed, faces are cleaned, cloths are rinsed, buckets are filled and emptied, spilled water is wiped before it spreads. The movement is unhurried because it has to be repeated many times. There is no drama in a bucket passed carefully from one hand to another, but the whole room depends on that kind of care. Cleanliness is made from repetition, not from one great gesture. Then comes the linen, which on a hospital ship is almost a language of its own. Sheets are folded so they can be opened with one motion. Towels are stacked by habit and count. Blankets are brought in order and taken away in order. A fresh sheet can make a bed look less like a stopping place and more like a place where time can continue. Linen is soft, but its role is exact. It marks the difference between a surface and a prepared surface. It marks the difference between a room and a room that has been made ready again. In an ordinary hospital, this is already true. At sea, where motion keeps trying to undo the arrangement, the linen becomes part of the ship's quiet discipline. The papers matter just as much. A chart, a slip, a card, a ledger entry, a note written at the edge of a page. These are the objects that turn a room into a system. The patient is never only in the bed. The patient is also in the record, in the set of times, in the list of what was brought, what was changed, what was observed, what was passed on. On a hospital ship, the record has to travel well. It has to stay legible while the ship moves. It has to follow a person from one room to another without losing its place. The page is a kind of corridor. It carries the patient's history when the body itself must be moved carefully. That is why the logbook feels so important in the dark. It belongs to the ship, but it also belongs to the day's work. A ship's log has to remember the route, the weather, the changes of course, the ordinary facts that would otherwise blur together. A hospital record has to remember the person, the room, the moment, the note that would otherwise be swallowed by the next task. Together they make a pair of records, one for the vessel, one for the care aboard it. The vessel cannot separate itself from the treatment, and the treatment cannot be understood without the vessel. The sea keeps both under pressure. The page keeps both in order. Time on a hospital ship is not measured only by the clock. It is measured by routines that return. A round is made. A lamp is checked. A basin is refilled. A blanket is straightened. A chart is read again. The habit of returning matters because it tells the room that it is still being watched. It tells the patient that the ship has not drifted into neglect. It tells the crew that the work is continuing, even in a quieter hour. The ship's bell or clock may mark the hour, but the real proof of time is the renewed attention to small things. Repetition is not boredom here. Repetition is care made visible. There is a separate sort of routine in the galley, where the ship turns the ordinary fact of hunger into another part of the day's order. Food has to be prepared, carried, and served in a way that suits people who are weak, tired, or simply waiting. A hospital ship cannot afford casual movement in the service of meals. Trays must arrive on time. Cups must not spill. Hot food must remain hot long enough to matter. Cooler food must still be ready to eat without fuss. The galley, like the ward, depends on planning that is almost invisible when it works. When it fails, everyone notices. When it succeeds, the room seems to breathe a little more easily. The route from the galley to the ward is one of the ship's most important routes. It is short in distance and long in consequence. A tray begins in one room, passes through a doorway, turns a corner, crosses a narrow stretch of deck, and arrives where it is needed. That journey has to survive the motion of the ship, the interruptions of the day, and the limits of carrying. On land, a meal can be left on a cart for a moment. At sea, the tray needs a hand that knows how to move with the hull. The route is as important as the food. A hospital ship is built from routes as much as rooms. The storeroom gives those routes their substance. Crates, boxes, bundles, tins, folded paper, spare parts, and labeled containers all matter because they keep the ship from depending entirely on chance. The hospital ship lives from supply. It needs linen, water, paper, fuel, instruments, cleaning materials, and 1,000 small things that never become dramatic until they are missing. The storeroom is where order is tested before it is used. What has been packed on shore must survive transport. What has been lifted aboard must be found again. The route from dock to storeroom is part of the medical work, because a hospital cannot care for anyone without the things that make care possible. That dependence on supply gives the dockside another kind of importance. The harbor is not just scenery. It is the place where the ship is replenished, where boxes come aboard, where records may be checked against what is actually present, where the next stretch of service is made possible by the shore that remains outside the hull. A hospital ship sits between worlds. It is not quite shore, not quite battlefield, not quite home, not quite ward. It receives from the land and sends back to the land. In that exchange, the dock becomes part of the medicine. The gangway is not only a bridge for feet, it is a bridge for order. Inside, the corridors and stairways shape the day as much as the rooms do. A hospital ship depends on movement, but not on any movement at all. It needs movement that is measured. A stretcher has to pass without striking corners. A cart has to turn without delay. A nurse carrying a chart has to meet a patient being guided to another space. A cleaner has to reach the floor without blocking a passage. Every step matters because the corridor is narrow and the sea does not keep still. In a floating hospital, even a simple trip from one station to another becomes part of the ship's design. The route is short, but the discipline behind it is large. The treatment rooms carry a different kind of silence. They are rooms where attention is narrowed. A patient arrives. Objects are set down. Hands move to the correct places. The room accepts only what belongs there. Even without naming every tool, one can understand the seriousness of such a room by its arrangement. Surfaces are clear, shelves are near, cloth is ready. The people inside are focused on the immediate task and not on the grand idea of the ship. Yet the grand idea is present in every detail. A floating hospital must concentrate the work of many shorerooms into a smaller number of shipboard spaces. It must make that concentration feel ordinary. Air matters there too. A ship is full of enclosed spaces, and an enclosed space can feel heavy if it is not managed well. Openings, vents, fans, doors, and the movement of air through the vessel all become part of the room's usefulness. Salt air comes in from outside. Warmth gathers. Odors have to be kept from lingering. A room that is meant for care cannot be left to itself. It must be aired, wiped, and returned to usefulness again and again. The sea offers a surrounding openness, but the ship must keep its own interior air in good order. That is one of the hidden forms of labor aboard any hospital vessel. At night, the ship becomes especially attentive to light. Lamps are dimmed where they can be dimmed. Brightness is kept where it is needed. A night watch moves through the vessel with a different set of priorities than the day watch. The point is not to wake everyone. The point is to preserve enough visibility for the next act of care. A glass of water should be found without a crash. A door should open without surprise. A chart should be legible without turning the room harsh. The darkness of the sea outside makes the interior glow feel even more deliberate. The ship is not lit for display, it is lit for work. That is one reason midnight feels so fitting for the hospital ship. Midnight is not only the edge of one day and the beginning of another, it is also the hour when routine proves itself without an audience. The work continues, but in a reduced key. A blanket is smoothed, a page is initialed, a basin is carried away, a threshold is crossed quietly. The ship's ordinary tasks become almost ceremonial in their restraint. There is nothing flashy in the act of resetting a room so it will be ready at dawn. There is only the knowledge that readiness, once lost, is harder to recover than to preserve. Hospital ships belong to a larger habit of military and maritime order. The Navy knows how to keep a vessel supplied, cleaned, reported, and moved. Medicine knows how to keep a room ready, a record accurate, and a person from being left alone with confusion. On a hospital ship, those habits meet. The result is not a hospital copied from shore and set afloat unchanged. It is a ship that has learned how to carry the logic of a hospital without losing the logic of seamanship. The one is not absorbed into the other. They remain distinct, but they cooperate. That cooperation is the whole point. A floating hospital is a meeting place between forms of discipline. The Navy's later hospital ships carried that same arrangement forward in larger and more visible ways, but the underlying idea remained the same. The room, the object, and the routine still had to agree with one another. A bed still needed a place. A chart still needed a line. A blanket still needed a fold. A supply still needed a route. The scale could change. The century could change. The setting could change. But the work still depended on details that would look plain to anyone not waiting for them. That is often how real service appears from a distance. It looks simple because many hands have made it dependable. When the patient leaves a room on such a ship, the room does not become empty in a careless way. It becomes reset. That is a different kind of emptiness, one full of preparation. The sheet is changed, the tray is cleared, the record is updated, the basin is carried off, the chair is put back. The room waits for the next person without losing its shape. A shore hospital does this too, of course, but on a ship the resetting feels more audible, as if every object has to be resituated against the possibility of motion. The room remembers that it has been used, and it also remembers that it must be used again. That memory is not sentimental, it is practical. A hospital ship survives by remembering what belongs where. A mislabeled drawer wastes time. A missing cloth slows the day. A misplaced chart can break the chain between one room and another. So the ship trains its people to respect order as a form of mercy. They learn to return objects to the same place, to carry water without spilling it, to fold linen in a way that preserves the next motion, to write clearly, to check twice, and to move quietly when quiet helps. These habits are not small, they are the texture of care. And so the chapter ends where the room begins, with the ordinary objects that keep the work from slipping away. The bucket, the blanket, the chart, the tray, the cabinet, the corridor, the lamp, the logbook. Each one has a role. Each one has a place. Together they turn a ship into a hospital and a midnight watch into something that can be trusted. The sea goes on moving, but the room remains ready. Behind that ready room, the laundry room kept its own pale heat. Sheets came in damp from use, passed through hands, and returned folded to the next bed. No patient saw the whole circuit at once, yet the circuit was part of the care. Someone sorted the linen, someone lifted it from a basket, someone fed it through the wash, someone stacked it in the right order so the next shift would not have to search. That was true of towels, blankets, gowns, and the small cloths that moved through a hospital ship without ever becoming memorable. A clean sheet is not an ornament, it is readiness made visible. It is the room being returned to itself after use so that the work can go on without drift. The galley answered to the same rhythm. A tray of broth, tea, soft food, or plain water had to leave one room and arrive in another without becoming a spill in the passage. The people in the galley were not only cooking, they were timing, counting, carrying, and correcting. A hospital ship needs meals the way it needs records and clean linen. Food must arrive when it is needed, still fit for the person who is waiting. A cup must be easy to grip. A tray must stay balanced. A mess of small delays can unsettle a whole watch. The galley crew knew that the ordinary act of feeding people was one of the ways the ship kept its shape. Farther from the ward, the storeroom carried another share of the burden. Crates, tins, bottles, paper packets, folded cloth, spare parts, and labels all had to be brought aboard in an order that made sense later when the ship was moving and the hour was late. The pier was part of the hospital before the first patient ever crossed the gangway. Dockside hands loaded what would become the ship's quiet supply of care. Inside, someone had to keep track of what went where, what was running low, and what should not be touched until the right moment. A hospital ship lives by supply, in the same way a household lives by pantry and cellar. The difference is that every item must survive motion. Every object must be stored so that it can be found again in a narrow corridor, a rolling room, or a dim locker. Below that, in spaces most people never see, the ship's motion was kept alive by another set of workers. The bridge, the engine room, the deck, and the machinery spaces belonged to the people who made the vessel move, turn, stop, and remain steady enough for the hospital to function. On the modern Comfort, the ship itself is run by civilian mariners from Military Sealift Command, while Navy medical personnel come aboard to staff the treatment spaces. That division matters. It shows that a hospital ship is not one blurred occupation, but two kinds of craft living inside one hull. One group keeps the course, the power, the pumps, and the deck work. Another group keeps the wards, the supplies, and the care. The seam between them is where the ship becomes useful. That seam is also where the human scale of the work becomes visible. A nurse cannot do the job of the engine room, and an engineer cannot do the job of the ward, but both are carrying the same larger purpose. A mariner brings the ship to the place where care is needed. A medical worker turns that place into a working hospital. The ship depends on both forms of skill. It also depends on the people who move between them, carrying messages, supplies, and practical needs from one side to the other. The vessel is not a single profession. It is a partnership between seamanship and medicine, and the partnership only works when each side respects the other's labor. In the ward, the division of labor becomes even more exact. Doctors, nurses, corpsmen, and support staff each carry something different. The physician makes judgments. The nurse keeps watch over the room and the shift. The hospital corpsman carries the practical burden from bed to bed, from chart to tray, from instruction to action. No one of those roles stands alone. A single decision becomes a sequence of hands. A patient who needs water, a cleaner bandage, a fresh sheet, a new note, or a careful move to another space depends on that sequence. The work succeeds because it is repeated without show. A hospital ship does not need grand gestures. It needs people who can return to the same task as often as the task requires. The desk nearby has its own importance. Clerks, administrators, and people assigned to records turn the day into paper. They keep names straight, notes legible, supplies counted, and orders readable. A floating hospital needs that paper more than it likes to admit. Without it, the work cannot be handed from one shift to another. The record is a bridge between people who may never meet. It keeps the next person from guessing. It makes the next room know what this room already learned. The logbook, the chart, the supply list, and the entry in the register all belong to the same habit of care. Make the day visible enough that it can be continued. A ship at sea cannot afford to lose continuity, neither can a hospital. That kind of continuity did not appear all at once. Earlier shipboard medicine was less specialized and more improvised. A vessel carrying the sick had to borrow hands from its own company whenever need arose. A sailor might be told to help in a sick berth. A man trained for one duty might be sent to another because the ship had no one else to spare. As naval medicine became more formal, those tasks were divided more carefully. The hospital corps gave the Navy a trained enlisted medical arm. The nurse corps gave nursing a formal place in naval service. The ship's own crew did not disappear, but the work was no longer left to happen by accident. It was given names, training, and a chain of responsibility. That change mattered because a hospital ship cannot afford confusion about whose task is whose. It needs a person who knows the ward, a person who knows the engine, a person who knows the pantry, a person who knows the records, and a person who knows the route between them. The title on a sleeve or badge is not decoration. It is a promise that the next person in line will know where to send the request. The ship becomes safer when that promise is clear. A doctor should not have to wonder who will bring the linen. A mariner should not have to guess who has the chart. A patient should not have to wait for a room to figure out itself. Specialization on a ship is a form of mercy. Still, some of the most important workers never stand in the center of a room at all. The cleaner who keeps the floor dry, the steward who knows where the cups are, the orderly who helps move a chair without making a noise, the cook who sends a meal out on time, the person who straightens a stack before it slides, the person who closes a locker the right way so it will open again later. These are not dramatic tasks, but they are the reason the ship can behave like a hospital instead of a crowded vessel with good intentions. The room does not stay ready by itself. It stays ready because someone keeps returning it to order. That return is a kind of labor that can be overlooked because it is so ordinary. A clean towel laid in the right place, a lamp checked before it dims, a note initialed at the edge of a page, a tray carried through a corridor without striking the wall, a blanket folded so the next person can reach it quickly. Each act seems too small to matter until the room depends on it. Then it becomes obvious that the work of care is not one large effort. It is a chain of small, accurate acts. The people who carry those acts are carrying the whole atmosphere of the ship. They are carrying the steadiness that lets everyone else sleep, work, or wait without feeling the room come apart. The corridors and stairs turn that labor into a map. On a hospital ship, movement has to be learned as carefully as any other task. Some turns are narrow, some doors need two hands, some carts sway if they are taken too quickly, some loads need a second person. The crew learns where the tight spaces are, where the floor may feel different underfoot, where the passage must stay clear, where a tray should not be left, where a patient can be moved with the least disturbance. In time, the ship becomes a shared geography. A person can move through it in the dark because the routes have been practiced into memory. That is another form of carrying the map of the ship in the mind so the work can move without hesitation. The same is true before the ship leaves the pier. Shore workers, supply crews, and the people who prepare the load all carry a piece of the hospital long before the vessel sails. Linen, medicine, food, paper, fuel, and tools must arrive in order. If one chain breaks, the ship feels it later in a corridor or a ward. The hospital ship is never only what happens inside the hull. It is the visible point of a wider labor system that stretches back through the dock, the storage area, the warehouse, the office, and the list of names and quantities that someone had to keep straight. Every loaded crate is a decision already made. Every carefully tied bundle is a promise that the next room will not be left short. There is also the quieter labor of steadiness. Some people carry not objects, but atmosphere. They know how to enter a room without tightening it. They know when to speak and when silence serves the patient. They know how to return after an interruption without making the interruption the center of the day. A hospital ship needs that kind of presence. The patient hears the voices, the footsteps, the careful knock, the page turned at the desk, the movement of the tray, the calm of someone who does not need to announce their competence. That calm is not a soft extra. It is part of the equipment. It prevents unnecessary strain. The people who carried the work also carried knowledge in their hands: a folded sheet, a tied line, a clean cup, a counted supply, a chart placed in the right folder, a tray balanced in a moving corridor. Each action becomes memory for the next shift. The ship trusts what has been done correctly because the work must be repeated. The ward trusts the galley. The galley trusts the store. The store trusts the dock. The dock trusts the ledger. The ledger trusts the person who wrote it down. That trust is not sentimental, it is operational. Without it, the ship turns into a collection of rooms. With it, the rooms become a hospital. This is why the hospital ship feels so distinct in history. It makes visible what medicine often hides: that care is collective labor. One face may be remembered. One voice may be heard. One hand may be noticed at the bedside. But behind that hand are many others: the mariner who kept the vessel moving, the engineer who kept power and pumps alive, the nurse who watched the room, the corpsman who brought the practical help, the clerk who kept the page straight, the cook who sent food at the right time, the steward who knew the supply, the cleaner who returned the room to itself. None of them carried the whole burden alone, and none of them could have. A hospital ship is not a single building with a flag on it. It is a community of interlocking tasks. It is a place where people carry trays, charts, linen, water, messages, power, direction, and steadiness, each in a different form. The patient may remember a face or a voice, but the ship is held together by many hands. That is the lesson of the people who carried the work. Their labor was modest in appearance, exact in practice, and necessary in every hour. The next question is not whether the ship can contain care. It can. The question is what the hull can measure, store, and sustain before its own limits begin to speak. A hospital ship begins with a count of what it can keep, and the count is already telling. Feet, tons, beds, suites, gallons, and units are not decoration. They are the language of a vessel that has to make care fit inside steel. Comfort was built as a tanker first, and that origin still matters. A tanker is a ship of volume and balance, built to carry bulk across distance. When that hull was converted into a Mercy-class hospital ship, the old geometry stayed in place. What changed was the duty assigned to it. The long body that once carried fuel had to learn how to carry wards, clean water, blood, food, motion, and the people who make those things useful. That transformation never erased the fact that the ship is still a ship. It was delivered to the U.S. Navy on December 1, 1987. It is the second of two Mercy-class hospital ships, and that alone places it in a narrow historical category. There are not many vessels built for this purpose. The purpose itself is unusual enough to deserve attention. The sea does not give up space kindly. A hospital ship must accept the sea on the sea's own terms, then build a working hospital on top of that moving ground. The result is not a land hospital moved offshore. It is a different kind of institution, one that has to make room for medicine without pretending that room is endless. The size of the vessel tells the first truth. It is 894 feet long and 106 feet wide, with a full load displacement above 63,000 tons. Those figures are not simply impressive, they are the frame of the problem. A long ship is not only long on paper, it is long in passageways, long in supply routes, long in the time it takes to carry a patient, or a tray, or a cart from one end to another. Width matters too. A beam of that scale gives the ship breathing room, but not extravagance. Every corridor, every ward, every utility space has to earn its place. When the sea is the floor beneath, there is no room for waste. Even the ship's motion is measured. 2 steam-generating boilers feed GE turbines through one shaft. The machinery is a reminder that a hospital ship does not drift into usefulness. It has to be moved into position, held there, and kept there by systems that cannot fail casually. The engine room is part of the hospital, whether anyone in a patient ward sees it or not. Power reaches the rooms because the boilers are working. water reaches the taps because machinery is turning. The air stays managed because the ship's systems are doing their unseen labor. On a vessel like this, movement and medicine are tied together. If the motion stops, the work is at risk. If the work is delayed, the motion has been wasted. Inside that body, the spaces are carefully divided. There are 15 patient wards, 80 intensive care beds, 11 general-purpose operating suites, and a separate interventional radiology suite. The point of those rooms is not variety for its own sake, it is order. A hospital ship has to sort intensity. It has to keep the most urgent work close to the center of the machine, where power, air, and access can be managed with discipline. It cannot be one huge hall where everything happens at once. It has to be many smaller rooms, each one built to keep a different kind of attention. The wards are not just beds lined up in a row. They are a way of making severity legible. They tell the ship how to arrange care without confusing one need for another. 10 personnel elevators carry that order between levels. They are not a minor convenience. They are part of the way the ship remains a hospital instead of becoming a crowded hull. On land, movement between floors can feel ordinary. On a ship, vertical movement has to be managed with far more care. Patients move, supplies move, staff move, meals move, clean linen, equipment, and records move too. A lift becomes a route, and a route becomes a promise that the work can continue without unnecessary delay. The elevators are among the quietest pieces of the vessel, but they are among the most important. They let the ship keep its distances small, even though the hull itself is large. The same logic appears in the blood bank. 5,000 units is not a number meant for ornament. It says that the vessel has to be ready to receive one of the most perishable materials in medicine and keep it safely. Blood is not stored as a trophy. It is held in reserve because reserve is sometimes the only honest answer to uncertainty. The ship also produces more than 200,000 gallons of fresh water each day. That figure matters for the same reason. The sea surrounds the ship, but the ship still has to make its own drinkable water, its own cleaning water, its own steady supply for the work of keeping everything sanitary. The sea is present in abundance, but abundance does not equal usability. The machine has to turn one into the other. Meals are counted as well, and the count is large, more than 7,000 each day. That number gives the galley a place beside the wards and operating suites, not below them. A hospital ship has to feed patients, crew, and medical staff on a strict rhythm. Food is not background. It is part of the schedule that keeps the rest of the ship from fraying. A vessel that can serve that many meals has to be able to store, prepare, move, and clean on an industrial scale. The galley, the serving lines, the dish handling, the waste removal, the timing of shifts and rest periods, all of it belongs to the same system of care. No patient sees the whole apparatus, but each meal is a reminder that treatment rests on much more than what happens in a room with a bed. Accommodation tells another version of the same story. The ship is built to house more than 1,300 personnel. That figure includes the people needed to make the hospital function as a moving institution, the mariners who keep the vessel alive, and the medical staff who turn the spaces into care. At berth in Norfolk, the ship lives in a smaller state. A reduced operating status keeps it ready with roughly 8 officers, 53 enlisted personnel, and about 15 civilian mariners. That small company is enough to maintain readiness, but not enough to pretend the ship is dormant. It is waiting, and waiting is work. The ship remains prepared by people who know that the larger body may need to awaken at any hour. The difference between that smaller state and full mission scale is part of the design. A hospital ship does not spend its whole life at maximum size. It has one set of numbers for keeping ready and another for answering a call. That is why the measurement matters so much. It tells the shore what the ship can become. It also tells the shore what it cannot become. More than 1,300 people can be accommodated, but that is still finite. More than 7,000 meals can be served, but not indefinitely without support and planning. 5,000 blood units can be stored, but not in place of a land system. The ship's strength lies in its clarity about those boundaries. It is a large instrument, not an endless one. Those boundaries have been tested in war, hurricane response, earthquake relief, and other humanitarian missions. In those settings, the ship has served as an afloat trauma center, a support vessel, and a place where shore systems could breathe a little easier. The same measured hull has been asked to answer different kinds of need in different places. Each mission has shown the same basic truth. The ship is not a substitute for every land hospital. It is a specific tool, built for acute surgical care and for relief work that has to move fast. The limits are not a weakness hidden in the margins. They are the terms that make the work possible at all. That is why the numbers matter to trust. A bed count, a water count, a blood count, a crew count, and a meal count are more than administration. They are a public shape of honesty. They say that the ship has thought about what it can carry, what it can produce, and what it must receive from outside. They keep the story from sliding into fantasy. A hospital ship without counts would be only a dream of help. A hospital ship with counts becomes an institution. It can be judged, it can be maintained, it can be sent out, knowing the difference between hope and capacity. The steel itself carries that lesson. The hull does not promise infinity, it promises structure. It makes a boundary out of mass, then fills that boundary with rooms, routes, machinery, and supplies. Inside those limits, the ship can do real work. Outside them, other hospitals, other ships, and other systems must take over. That is not failure. It is the honest shape of distributed care. A floating hospital makes sense only when it knows where it ends. The precision of its measurements is what lets it serve people well. By midnight, the arithmetic of the ship is already in motion. Water is being made, rooms are being held in order, meals are being counted, beds are being kept ready. Elevators are waiting for the next movement through the hull. The ship's mercy lives in that discipline. It is not limitless, and it does not need to be. It only needs to be exact enough to carry help where it is needed, and steady enough to remain honest about what it can do. In that arithmetic, the limits do not silence the ship, they give it its shape. In the dark, the ship becomes a catalog of measured tolerances. A corridor is wide enough for a stretcher, but not so wide that it wastes space. A door is heavy enough to keep pressure, but light enough to open quickly when hands are full. A bulkhead is not just steel, it is a decision about what must be separated, what must be joined, and how much force the hull can take before the order of the interior begins to fail. Every passage has a width, every ladder has a pitch, every room has a purpose. The ship does not improvise with those facts. It inherits them, honors them, and turns them into work. That work begins long before a patient arrives. The linen room is stacked by count, not by feeling. The galley measures flour, rice, coffee, and milk by the day's demand. The pharmacy keeps track of tablets, vials, ampules, and the small glass bottles that look ordinary until a doctor reaches for one in the middle of the night. In the laboratory, glassware waits for blood, urine, and other samples that become numbers before they become decisions. In radiology, film or sensors keep an image that cannot be guessed from the outside. In the operating spaces, trays are arranged with a kind of disciplined silence. Clamps, scalpels, sutures, gauze, suction, sterilized and reset for the next use. None of it is dramatic when seen from the deck. It is exact. That exactness is the difference between readiness and theater. The ship is also full of small economies that no one notices unless they stop. Fresh water is made and stored because the ocean around the hull is not the kind that can be poured into a cup. Electricity is produced because light, suction, refrigeration, ventilation, and communication all depend on it. Air is moved because a closed vessel can become a stagnant one if its breath is not managed. Heat is carried away from machinery. Waste is collected, sealed, and sent onward in ways that keep the living spaces livable. Even the laundry has its mathematics. Sheets become clean sheets only after they have been counted. washed, dried, folded, and delivered back to the ward. A ship that treats bodies has to treat cloth, metal, water, and air with the same seriousness. At midnight, the records grow more important, not less. A census is taken of beds occupied and beds open. Supplies are checked against the ledger. Messages are sent to shore, to another ship, to a base hospital, to an office that knows the difference between one crate and another. Patient charts accumulate the day in handwriting and numbers. The captain's log and the medical log each preserve a different truth, and together they show how the vessel is being used. Nothing on a ship is fully real until it has been recorded. The record is not bureaucracy for its own sake. It is memory made durable enough to steer by. And yet the record also admits the boundary. The ship can stabilize, operate, isolate, recover, and return. It cannot make the sea stop moving. It cannot create a harbor where there is no harbor. It cannot turn every case into a success without help from shore, from aircraft, from supply chains, from other hospitals that take over when the patient needs a longer road than the hull can provide. That is why the ship is both powerful and modest. It is not a world unto itself. It is an instrument in a larger system, and its usefulness depends on knowing that fact before the crisis arrives. The people who keep that instrument alive learn the language of limits by heart. The cook knows how many mouths a mess can serve. The nurse knows how long a ward can keep before another round must begin. The engineer knows what the generators sound like when they are healthy and when they are asking for attention. The steward knows where every crate belongs because the wrong crate in the wrong place can become a delay at the wrong hour. The corpsman knows that a patient's safety can depend on a towel, a thermometer, a label, or a few saved minutes. The ship is not staffed by abstractions. It is staffed by people who translate measurement into mercy. So the hospital ship keeps going in the dark, not because it is endless, but because it is bounded well. Its rooms are measured, its stores are counted, its routes are kept clear, its limits are known. Within those limits, it can receive the wounded, the exhausted, the frightened, and the waiting. It can make order out of motion and relief out of procedure. It can carry help across the water with a discipline so steady that, by midnight, even its restraint feels like care. A casebook opens on the ward desk, and the page has the look of a small, careful road. Names, times, changes, remarks, the turn of a fever, the return of appetite, the day a dressing is renewed, the hour a bed is shifted. Paper like that is easy to overlook until nothing else can keep the work together. On a hospital ship, it is as necessary as the rail along the corridor. It keeps treatment from dissolving into memory. It lets one hand know what another hand has already done. It turns a moving room into a place where practice can continue without starting over each time the light changes. Hospitals themselves changed for that same reason. In older centuries, many were chiefly houses of shelter, charity, and last resort. They received the poor, the lonely, the exhausted, the wounded, and the dying. Their kindness was real, but their purpose was mixed. Over time, the hospital became more than a refuge. It became a place where illness was watched, compared, separated, and treated in a continuing way. That change did not arrive all at once. It came through habits, through cleaner rooms, through stronger routines, through the decision to keep records because the next hour might matter as much as the first. The bedside changed too. In the older habit, care often arrived at home, in private rooms, with the family nearby and the doctor passing through. In the newer hospital, the patient entered a shared world. Beds stood near one another. A handbell or a call for help could reach across several lives at once. The patient no longer belonged to a single visit or a single memory. The hospital made illness visible over time. It allowed doctors and nurses to return, compare, and revise. One day could be weighed against another. The body became a sequence rather than a single event. That sequence mattered because the hospital changed the meaning of observation. A pulse once taken in passing could now be followed over hours. A temperature could be compared with its earlier reading. A wound could be watched in the same light on different days. A chart could tell whether rest was helping, whether food was staying down, whether sleep had returned. Nothing here is dramatic in itself. That is the point. Modern hospital practice grew by honoring the ordinary. It learned that the patient who is seen only once can be misunderstood, while the patient who is returned to again and again can be known more carefully. The rooms themselves changed with that idea. Wards were arranged so beds could be seen, aired, and cleaned. Windows mattered. Space between beds mattered. Order mattered. Clean floors, clean linens, and scrubbed surfaces were not decoration. They were part of the method. As ideas about infection sharpened, hospitals began to understand that dirt was not only untidy but dangerous, and that separation could protect as well as organize. A hospital ward became a place where the arrangement of furniture was tied to the arrangement of disease. A room that was brighter, cleaner, and more open could become a safer place to treat the sick. The same was true of the people who moved through those rooms. Nurses and attendants carried much of the daily labor that made the new hospital possible. They washed, fed, lifted, changed linen, carried messages, measured, watched, and returned. They learned the repeated work that keeps patients from slipping into neglect. Their labor was often quiet enough to disappear behind the authority of the physician, yet the whole system depended on it. A hospital could not be a hospital without someone who knew where the basins were kept, when the cups were returned, when the linens had to be changed, and when a patient who said little needed to be looked at more closely. Records changed that labor into a shared practice. A chart made the ward a place of continuity. It held the day's numbers, the changes in condition, the notes about meals, sleep, pain, and recovery. A discharge book held the ending. A linen list held the stores. A medicine cabinet held the measured supply. Each list belonged to another list. The hospital became a network of paper as well as a network of rooms. That was one of the quiet revolutions of hospital medicine. It taught care to outlive the moment. It gave memory a place to live other than the mind of one hurried worker. Surgery changed in the same long, careful way. It became less a desperate last resort and more a planned part of hospital life, with its own room, its own table, its own set of instruments, its own cleaning routines, and its own return to recovery. The operating room had to be prepared before the patient arrived. Tools had to be set in order. Surfaces had to be ready. Clothing had to be changed. Hands had to be washed. The room itself became part of the procedure. Surgery did not simply happen inside a building. It required a building that had been organized to allow it. That is why the hospital ship is so revealing. It takes all of those hospital habits and forces them into a narrower shape. The ship cannot pretend that care is only a matter of skill in the abstract. It must make room for the bed, the tray, the dressing, the chart, the basin, the instrument case, the store cupboard, and the place where waste leaves the patient's side. Every object has to earn its space. Every corridor has to serve more than one purpose. Every task has to be coordinated with motion, because the sea does not stop while the ward is busy. The ship carries not just patients, but a whole style of medicine. That style depends on logistics as much as compassion. A hospital on land can hide some of its supply chain behind walls. A hospital ship cannot. Linen must be stored and counted. Clean water must be available. Dressings must be ready. Medicines must be secured. Meals must be timed. Waste must be removed. The laundry room, the pantry, the supply locker, and the records desk are not minor support spaces. They are part of the treatment itself. The ship reminds medicine that every act of healing rests on a smaller act of keeping the system in order. A wound dressed well depends on cloth that was folded and stored well. The route of the patient changed as well. In older care, a sick person might remain in one room while help came and went. In the newer hospital, the patient moved through stages. A stretcher brought the wounded person in. A ward received that person. A chart opened. A physician looked. A nurse returned. Perhaps the patient went to a different room for a more specific procedure. Perhaps the patient later moved to convalescence or to another hospital. The work became a chain of transfers. That chain is one reason hospitals became more effective. It allowed different kinds of attention to happen in different places without losing the person in the handoff. This change also altered the authority of medicine. A single learned figure could no longer be the whole hospital. The work needed attendants, nurses, record keepers, cleaners, orderlies, cooks, pharmacists, and doctors in separate but connected roles. The hospital became collective. The ship makes that truth plain. One person cannot wash every sheet, carry every tray, record every change, prepare every tool, and make every decision. When the patient is under a single roof that moves with the tide, the old image of solitary practice fades quickly. What remains is a team whose members depend on one another's exact labor. Teaching followed from that teamwork. The hospital became a place where younger practitioners learned by watching real cases unfold over time. A chart was not only a record for the patient, it was a lesson for the next worker. A ward round was not only a check on recovery, it was a form of education. A room with several beds could become a place where differences between conditions were compared and discussed. Medical knowledge moved from books into the lived rhythm of the ward. The hospital ship, in miniature, carried that same classroom at sea. Every change in condition could be read again by the next set of eyes. Public trust grew with that order. People were more willing to place themselves in hospital care when hospitals looked less like places of abandonment and more like places of method. Cleanliness mattered to that trust. So did repetition. So did the visible discipline of the staff. A hospital that can name its rooms, count its stores, keep its records, and separate its tasks appears less random and less frightening. A hospital ship had to earn that trust even more quickly, because a patient boarded not only a medical space, but a vessel. The promise was not escape from danger. The promise was that danger would be met with a system strong enough to answer it. Yet the hospital did not become certain. It became better organized. That is a different thing. Illness still resisted plans. Wounds still changed. Fevers still rose and fell without warning. The point of changing practice was not to remove uncertainty, but to make it easier to meet. A patient might improve because the room was cleaner, because the chart was read carefully, because food arrived on time, because someone noticed a change early enough to report it. None of those acts are grand. Together, they changed outcomes. The hospital made room for small decisions that, repeated across hours, became the real shape of care. The ship taught the same lesson under harsher conditions. At sea, nothing can be ignored for long. A locked cabinet must stay locked. A loose trolley must be secured. A misplaced record can delay an order. A missing linen bundle becomes a problem for the next bed. A forgotten route through the ship can slow a patient's movement at the very time movement matters most. Hospital practice changed by learning from that pressure. It was no longer enough to know what should be done in principle. The work had to be arranged so it could happen in sequence, under stress, without losing its way in the dark. That is why hospital history is never only a story about buildings. It is a story about habits becoming structure. The basin, the sheet, the chart, the supply list, the operating table, the cleaned floor, the separation of beds, the ordered corridor, the return visit, the supervised recovery, the discharge note, the transfer to another ward, the teaching round, the counted store, the scrubbed hands. These are the ordinary forms through which medicine changed. The hospital ship gathers them into one moving place. It says that care can travel if its practice is clear enough, and that movement need not destroy order if the order is built into the room. So the hospital ship becomes more than a vessel carrying the wounded. It becomes a sign of what hospitals have learned to be. Not only shelters, not only refuges, not only houses where sickness is endured. They have become places where illness is observed, managed, taught, recorded, and passed along with increasing care. On the deck, in the ward, beside the chart desk, that new practice is visible in the simplest objects: a pencil, a folded sheet, a basin, a bell, a lamp, a cabinet door opened and closed again. The sea remains dark outside. Inside, the work continues with the same steady patience that changed medicine itself. By midnight, the ship is still carrying that changed practice forward. The page in the casebook is filled. Another page waits, and the ward remains in motion without hurry. The hospital has learned how to travel, and the ship has learned how to think like a hospital. In that union, medicine became less a matter of isolated acts and more a discipline of repeated, careful attention. That is what changed practice meant in the hospital age. Not spectacle, but arrangement. Not noise, but method. Not miracle, but the long mercy of rooms kept ready for the next patient who arrives in the dark. And that thinking had to be disciplined. The ward could not rely on memory alone. It needed admission books, temperature charts, diet slips, medicine schedules, and discharge notes, each one making the patient visible across the length of a night. The nurse at the chart desk could tell who had been given laudanum, who had been kept on broth, who had been moved under a cooler ventilator, who still needed the dressing changed before the bell rang again. In a ship so narrow, every action touched another. The galley fed the ward, the laundry fed the linen cupboard fed the dressing table, and the dressing table fed the operating room. Steam, soap, water, and paper became part of treatment itself. Even the smallest item had a place. The thermometer returned to its case, the basin to the shelf, the scissors to the tray, the lamp to its hook, the blanket folded with the corners squared away. That order was more than convenience. It was a new promise that care could be repeated, checked, and taught. The hospital was becoming an institution with habits, not only a shelter with beds. On land, that change helped create the modern ward, the modern clinic, the modern teaching hospital where students could watch, compare, and learn from the daily sequence of care. At sea, it proved that the same discipline could cross water, endure motion, and keep its standards while the hull moved beneath it. The ship carried the old unpredictability of weather and war, but inside the wards it insisted on sequence: cleanse, observe, record, attend, return. Each step made the next one possible. And so the midnight hospital ship carried more than wounded bodies. It carried a method. It carried the expectation that a patient would be admitted, examined, dressed, fed, and watched with the same care no matter how dark the hour or how rough the sea. It carried trained hands that knew where the instruments belonged and where the record belonged and where the silence belonged. It carried the idea that a hospital was not just a building, but a practice that could be repeated wherever people agreed to keep faith with the details. When the watch changed, the lamps stayed lit. When the tide shifted, the rounds went on. In that steady motion, medicine learned how to remain itself. The next room was smaller than the ward and quieter than the passage outside it. A lamp hung over a table worn smooth by elbows and paper corners, and beside it stood a ledger book with a cloth spine, a stack of chart sheets, a stamp pad, and a pencil sharpened to a point that would not last the night. This room carried no drama. It did not need it. On a hospital ship, memory had to be made by hand. The sea moved the body, the shift changed the faces, and the page kept the order of what had happened. A note written at 1 hour could still be read when the deck had rolled into another hour. The ship's work became durable because someone wrote it down while it was still fresh enough to be true. The chart itself was a small traveling world. It held names, complaints, orders, measurements, notes about sleep or appetite, and the changes that mattered when one watch yielded to the next. A chart folder might pass through several hands before morning, but the page had to remain clear enough for any of them to read without guesswork. That clarity mattered because a hospital ship was always in motion, whether tied to a pier or riding at sea. A patient could move from intake to ward to examination space and still remain one continuous story on paper. The chart made the person visible to the whole ship at once. It also made the ship responsible. No detail was too ordinary to matter if it changed what came next. A missed line, a delayed note, a sample of handwriting that no one could decipher. Trust started there. in the refusal to let confusion pass as memory. Another book sat nearby for orders and supplies. It recorded what the ward asked for, what the storeroom released, what the medicine locker gave up, and what had to be counted again before the next round. On land, a hospital could lean on nearby stores. At sea, the ship had to know exactly what it held, because a shortage was not a small inconvenience, but a change in the shape of care. Linen, instruments, bandages, dressings, cleaning materials, and the plain household things that kept the ward livable all had to be tracked with the same sobriety as more specialized equipment. The order book did more than prevent waste. It taught restraint. It made staff think in sequences, in supply and use, in what could be replaced and what had to be conserved. A hospital ship was a medical place, but it was also a working vessel, and every working vessel lives by inventories. The transfer sheet gave the ship another kind of continuity. It followed movement from one compartment to another, from one deck to another, or from one set of hands to the next. That movement could look simple from a distance, but the paper knew better. A person changed position, and responsibility changed with it. A name on one line became an assignment for someone else, and the receiving hand needed the same facts the sending hand had already gathered. In a hospital ship, where the rooms were close together and the routes were short, the transfer sheet still mattered because short distance did not mean short consequence. It kept the path from becoming a blur. It also reminded everyone that care was never fixed in one place. It traveled with the record, then with the person, then back again as the record was updated. The habit of moving information cleanly was part of the habit of moving patients safely. Teaching on the ship grew from that movement of paper. A senior doctor, nurse, or orderly could lay a chart on the table and turn the pages as if turning a small history of the case. The point was not to recite facts for their own sake. The point was to show how facts were gathered, checked, and carried forward. One line meant one thing because another line had already been written before it, and a third line would need to follow after it. This was how a novice learned the rhythm of the place, not by hearing that records mattered, but by watching records do work. The ship became a classroom without needing to announce itself as one. Every corrected note, every clarified order, every neatly signed entry taught the next hand how to think. That kind of teaching was quiet and exact. It left no applause behind it, only a chart that the next shift could understand. The margins of the page were part of the lesson too. A crossed-out line, a corrected time, an added word, a name written again in a steadier hand, a note initialed after review. These small marks showed that medicine on a ship was not built on perfect memory, but on careful repair. If an entry was unclear, it could be amended. If a detail was missing, it could be supplied. If a procedure had been begun by one person and finished by another, the page had to show the handoff. The result was not prettiness, it was legibility. That mattered to teaching, because students learn from what is corrected as much as from what is complete. It mattered to trust, because an honest correction is often more reassuring than a false certainty. The record room, therefore, did more than store information. It modeled the discipline of admitting error without losing the thread of the work. When the watch changed, the chart followed the next reader. A tired face came in from the passageway, glanced once at the page, and knew where the work stood. That small moment carried more weight than it seemed to. On a ship, no one could assume the same person would stay beside the same bed all day. The ship demanded a habit of handoff. Information had to be plain enough that a new reader could enter without delay and without needing to question every line. That was one reason records became a form of teaching rather than a burden. They told the next person what had already been seen, what still needed attention, and what could be left alone for the moment. The steady exchange of knowledge across watches kept the ship from depending on luck or memory. It also gave the work an inner calm. People could rest because the page would wait for them, and the page could wait because someone had taken the time to write clearly. Outside the ship, the same habits made public trust possible. A hospital ship asked strangers to accept that it was a place of aid and not a place of attack, a place of care and not a place of concealment. That promise had to be legible from the pier, from the water, and from the records kept aboard. The ship's markings, its plainly medical purpose, and the disciplined absence of any military use were part of that promise. So were the admission lists, the service logs, the supply records, and the reports that could be reviewed afterward. Public trust did not come from sentiment alone. It came from the ability to account for the ship's actions. If the vessel said it had treated the sick, the papers needed to show how. If it said it had served in relief or evacuation, the routine had to match the claim. In that way, the paper trail was a public promise written in ordinary ink. Hospital ships had long depended on that promise because their place in the world was unusual. They were neither ordinary cargo carriers nor ordinary clinics. They were built to move into troubled waters and stay useful while other things around them remained unsettled. The emblems on the hull and the plain medical markings were not decoration. They were a declaration that the ship had set aside another purpose and taken on a medical one. The trust attached to those signs only lasted if the internal habits of the ship matched the claim. That is why the record room mattered so much. It turned a sign into a system. A marked ship could be seen from far off, but the forms inside it had to prove that the sign was honest. A hospital ship lived inside that double requirement, clear to the eye, disciplined in practice. The public did not need to know every line of procedure, but it did need to believe that the vessel could be read, inside and out. One particular register mattered because it marked arrival and departure. The admissions page gathered a name when the person first came aboard. The discharge page released that name again when the work on board was done. Between those two columns lay the ship's purpose. A hospital ship did not exist to keep people longer than needed. It existed to make passage safer, more ordered, and more humane. The record of entry and exit was therefore not bookkeeping in the narrow sense. It was part of the moral shape of the vessel. It showed that the ship knew the difference between keeping someone and helping someone move on. That is why these pages mattered to people on the ship and to people far beyond it. They made the movement of care visible without turning it into spectacle. A quiet line in a register could carry more public meaning than a long speech. Some folders held correspondence rather than clinical notes. Requests traveled in, responses traveled out, and the language stayed restrained because the ship had to answer to more than itself. A letter might ask for a status report, a supply item, a transfer, or a clarification. Another might carry a summary back to shore. Those pages mattered because a hospital ship was always part of a chain. It did not erase what came before it, and it did not claim to be the end of the road. The note that went ashore, the summary sent upward, the brief line entered for the next authority, all kept the chain intact. In that way, the record room connected the sickbay to the wider world without letting the work dissolve into rumor. Even when the contents were routine, the correspondence reminded everyone that the ship belonged to a larger public order and that its care had consequences beyond one deck. Years later, the papers remained when the wake behind the ship had disappeared. Boxes of correspondence, bound reports, patient lists, inventory sheets, orders, and summaries outlasted the voyage itself. What looks thin on a shelf can be sturdy in memory. A single page might keep a day's work, but a stack of pages could show the shape of an entire mission. Historians depend on that sort of evidence because it preserves the routine as well as the occasion. It shows not only the visible arrival of the ship, but the less visible labor that made arrival mean something. The archive keeps the timing of handoffs, the language of request and response, the way the ward talked to the storeroom, and the way the medical staff talked to the ship's company. It is a quieter form of endurance than the ship itself, yet it often lasts longer. Through those papers, the hospital ship remains more than an emblem or a memory. It becomes a working pattern that can still be studied. Those papers also preserved the limits of the work. A good record did not pretend that every need could be met at once, or that every day unfolded according to plan. It noted delays, shortages, repairs, and the times when a task had to be deferred because the ship was full, the weather had shifted, or another responsibility had pressed in from the side. That honesty was part of public trust too. A ship that reported only success would begin to sound less trustworthy than one that admitted strain. The paper trail could show that the work was real precisely because it was incomplete. It had edges, it had stoppages, it had choices made under pressure. In a hospital ship, that frankness mattered because care was happening in a setting where distance, movement, and limited storage all imposed their own discipline. The page did not remove the limit, but it made the limit visible, and that visibility kept the institution honest. Teaching and trust were therefore the same habit seen from two directions. Inside, it taught the next hand how to work. Outside, it showed the public why the work could be believed. A ship that trained its own people to write carefully and read carefully was also training them to guard the meaning of the whole vessel. The record room, the ward table, the supply cabinet, and the watch change all belonged to one system. A hospital ship could carry relief into a harbor or sit quietly at a pier, but it earned its authority through repetition. The forms had to match the practice. The practice had to match the purpose. When those things stayed aligned, the ship no longer looked like a temporary improvisation. It looked like an institution that had learned how to move without losing its shape. That was a large achievement for a floating hospital. It meant that the care given on board could be trusted by the people inside it and by the people looking on from outside. At the end of the page, a single line waited for the next note. The pencil lay close by, small and worn down, ready to carry one more fact before dawn. Beyond the bulkhead, the hull continued its low conversation with the water, and the ship held itself together through those familiar acts of writing, reading, counting, and handing on. The lamp in the records room did not need to burn brightly to do its work. It only had to keep the page legible for the next set of eyes. In that modest light, the hospital ship showed its deepest strength. It did not ask trust by grand speech. It earned it through the order that let care survive the dark, the move, and the change of watch. The water kept talking under the hull, and the next watch came in with a folded roster, a key ring, and the quiet confidence of people who knew the ship by touch as much as by sight. The lamp in the records room was still on. It threw a narrow light across the desk, the ledger, and the corner of the page where the last hand had stopped. That was enough. A hospital ship did not need brightness to begin the night's work again. It needed order and a new pair of eyes that could read the order without delay. The person arriving did not have to invent the hour. The hour was already there, written in names, times, and short notes that would have to carry the work until morning. Beyond that desk, the ward had settled into a different kind of attention. Curtains were partly drawn. Cups stood near the pillows. A basin waited on a stool. A folded blanket sat where a hand could reach it without searching. The room was quieter now, but it was not idle. It was being maintained. That is what night care often looks like on a hospital ship. Not a burst of action, not a grand intervention, but the steady keeping of small things in their proper places. A sheet that has slipped gets smoothed. A window latch gets checked. A glass of water is set within reach. A lamp is lowered until it is useful and no more. Each motion is plain. Together, they prevent confusion in the dark. A patient waking in the middle of the night does not need ceremony. The ship learned that long before the hour grew late, a step kept soft, a voice kept low, a hand that knows how to adjust a pillow without waking the whole berth, a cloth offered before a complaint has to be repeated. Ordinary care at sea is often a matter of preventing one small discomfort from becoming a second one. The sea already does enough to a body that is trying to rest. It shifts the floor. It changes the sound of every door. It gives the room a motion the patient did not choose. Night staff on a hospital ship answer that motion with patience. They do not remove the rolling. They make the rolling easier to endure. The corridor outside the ward has its own rules after dark. In daylight, a hospital ship can feel busy and continuous, with charts, trays, visitors, and moving hands crossing one another. At night, the same corridor becomes a route that must be learned again in a quieter key. A tray goes one way, a basin comes back another, a folded stack of linen passes in a narrow line against the wall. A person carrying a chart keeps it close to the body so it does not catch the doorframe. The ship's narrow spaces make discipline visible. There is no room for stray motion. A hospital ship works because people move with intention and because every route has been practiced into memory. The work becomes almost invisible when it succeeds. That is a sign of skill, not a lack of it. The laundry room keeps its own pale heat while the rest of the vessel settles. Sheets that have already done their work are gathered, counted, washed, dried, and folded again. Towels, pillow covers, and the small cloths that seem to disappear from notice during the day all pass through the same cycle. No patient sees the whole circuit at once, but the circuit is part of the care. Clean linen is not an ornament. It is the difference between a bed that has been used and a bed that has been returned to readiness. A ship is always fighting the wear of motion. Cloth absorbs that wear first. The laundry room answers it with repetition. That repetition is quiet, and it is exact. A stack of fresh linen on a shelf means tomorrow can begin without delay. The galley answers in another register. A hospital ship has to feed the people aboard it, and feeding is never a side task. It belongs to the same order as the chart table and the linen room. At night, the galley is already thinking about the next meal. A tray may be prepared for a patient who needs something simple. A pot may be set aside for the morning round. Cups, bowls, and utensils are arranged so they can move quickly without clatter. The people working there know the timing of the ship as well as the people in the ward do. A meal that arrives late is not just late. It breaks the rhythm of the watch. A meal that arrives smoothly is one more way the ship says the next hour has been considered. Food, like linen, becomes part of the hospital's discipline. Behind the public rooms, the storeroom waits with its own careful arithmetic. Boxes are stacked so labels can still be seen. Paper packets are placed where they can be reached without rummaging. Clean cloth, bandages, bottles, soap, and the unglamorous spare things that keep a ship functioning all have to remain in the right order through the night. The sea does not forgive a badly packed shelf. A hospital ship depends on counts. A missing item is not just a missing item, it is a delay in a room, where delay can change the shape of care. So the person on watch checks, counts, and checks again. The work does not feel dramatic because it is intended to prevent drama. That is the measure of good supply discipline aboard any medical vessel. The dispensary and the medicine locker carry the same lesson in smaller form. What is stored there is less visible than a bed or a tray, but it can matter just as much when the hour is late and the corridor is quiet. Labels must remain legible. Containers must be returned to the right place. Nothing can be assumed because the next person to open the drawer may not be the same person who closed it. Night work teaches exactness. The person who counts the shelf is not doing a clerical chore that stands apart from medicine. The count is part of the medicine. It allows the next room to trust that what it needs will be there when the door opens. A hospital ship cannot improvise its inventory and remain reliable. It has to know what it holds. The machinery spaces are far from the wards, but the night shift never forgets them. Power keeps the lamps lit. Ventilation keeps the rooms tolerable. Pumps keep the ship working. Heat, air, and movement are not abstract on a hospital vessel. They are conditions of care. If the hum changes, someone notices. If a system falters, the ward feels it quickly. The mariners who tend the ship's engines and systems may never set foot in the patient rooms during a normal watch, yet their work is present in every room that stays bright enough to read and cool enough to breathe in. A hospital ship is never only a medical interior. It is also a machine that must keep itself alive so medicine can continue inside it. That is ordinary care in a different uniform. The deck watch carries another kind of responsibility. Hatches must be secure. Railings must be checked. Doors that lead to the outer air must be closed properly when they are not needed. The sea outside is black enough to make the ship's lights seem almost domestic, like a house that has learned how to float. But the ship is not a house. It is still a vessel, and the outer world is still pressing against it. A loose object on deck can become a problem. A closed space that is not truly closed can upset the balance of the rooms below. So the night watch walks the edges, tests what should be tested, and leaves the rest still and ready. The work is not to fight the sea. It is to remain accurate in its presence. The people moving through those spaces carry different kinds of knowledge in the same hour. A nurse knows which patient slept lightly and which one needed the blanket adjusted twice. A corpsman knows where the clean gauze was left and where the chart was placed. A steward knows whether the cups have been returned. A mariner knows whether the hatch is secure, the passage clear, and the ship steady enough for the next transfer. No single person owns the whole watch. The ship belongs to a sequence of hands. That sequence is what makes the vessel feel calm, even when the hour is not. Each person adds a small certainty. Together they make the night feel held. Some patients wake only briefly, then settle again. Others remain awake and watch the dim shape of the room until sleep returns. Night staff learn not to hurry that moment. They know the value of a chair placed near the bed without fuss, of a clean cloth offered before a request has to be repeated, of a patient who is not talked over or crowded by concern. On a ship, the body already has enough to adjust to. A little kindness in the placement of a cup or the angle of a pillow can make the difference between a restless hour and a tolerable one. This is not dramatic medicine. It is the kind that keeps a person from feeling alone in the dark. The chart desk keeps the night from disappearing into memory. A note is made that the patient drank a little, or slept, or asked to have the shade lowered, or needed a blanket changed after the sea shifted the bed. Another line says what remains for morning. Another marks a supply that has to be replaced. Another confirms that the handoff was made and understood. The page is not decoration. It is the bridge from one watch to the next. In a ship that carries patients, that bridge matters because the same room is never truly left behind. It is simply handed forward. The next person may not have seen the whole night, but the record can tell that person what happened in it. That is how the work survives fatigue. Public trust begins to look different when it is seen from this hour. By day, a hospital ship may present itself as a clearly marked medical vessel, orderly and bright enough to be recognized from the pier or the harbor. By night, the proof is quieter. It is in the lamp that stays where it belongs. It is in the clean linen stacked where it can be reached. It is in the chart that tells the truth plainly enough for the next shift. It is in the absence of confusion. A vessel that keeps its rooms in order when no one is watching is a vessel that deserves confidence when people are watching. The dark does not create that trust. It reveals the habits that earned it. That is why the ordinary objects matter so much. The key ring, the lamp, the basin, the towel, the tray, the folded blanket, the chart, the logbook, the cup, the shelf, the cabinet door, the corridor stool, the rack of clean linen, none of them has meaning by itself. Each one becomes important through use. Each one belongs to a larger sequence of return, check, and handoff. The ship teaches that care is not only a feeling, it is a placement. It is the act of putting things where the next person can find them and leaving the room able to receive the next need without confusion. Midnight makes that lesson clearer because midnight removes the bright edges from everything else. There is no crowd, no commotion, no ceremony to hide behind. Only the work remains. A patient turns in sleep, a door opens and closes, a chart is corrected, a basin is emptied. A fresh cup of water appears beside the bed, a light is lowered after it has done its task. The ship does not become less alive in that hour, it becomes more exact. That exactness is the quiet center of ordinary care. By the time the watch begins to lean toward dawn, the rooms are not transformed. They are simply held in readiness for one more turn. The laundry will go on washing. The galley will go on timing the next meal. The storeroom will go on counting. The engines will go on carrying power. The ward will go on resting and waking and being tended. The night has not ended the ship's work. It has only shown how much of that work depends on quiet hands, steady routes, and the small discipline of doing the simple thing well before the light changes. The chart room was another kind of quiet room. Its shelves did not keep medicine itself so much as the proof that medicine had been placed in order. On a hospital ship, the page carried almost the same weight as the tray, because a tray could be handed from one person to another, while the page told the next person what the last person saw. Modern medicine kept that habit. It did not outgrow the list, the label, or the note in the margin. It learned to move faster, to measure more finely, to name more things, yet it still depends on writing down who came in, where that person went, what was found, and what was passed onward. The older bedside never disappeared. It was given a filing place and a new kind of speed. The chart room is where that change becomes plain. Care as both action and record. A medicine cabinet is a form of memory. So is a shelf with numbered bottles, a drawer of bandages, a cart with sealed packages, a ledger that says what is missing and what must be sent again. The ship's medical supply and pharmacy spaces showed how much of care is really inventory. Every age of medicine has had its own names for this work, but the work itself stays close to the same. Someone counts, someone signs, someone checks the seal, someone makes sure the thing that will be needed later is ready now. Modern medicine still leans on that discipline. Its skill is not only in diagnosis or surgery, it is in arrangement, in the small certainty that the right item will be where the room expects it. Without that, even the best plan stumbles before it begins. The laboratory marked a deeper change. The bedside no longer held every answer. Some answers had to be carried away, tested, compared, and returned as a note. That did not erase older medicine. It reorganized it. The patient was still observed, the pulse still felt, the wound still looked at, but now the room with the bench stood beside the ward. The blood bank joined that same logic. What had once been a scarce emergency outside the building became part of the building's design. The modern hospital learned to keep more of its own means on hand, and the ship carried that lesson in a form that could move. A clean sample, a labeled tube, a result placed in the right hands, these became as ordinary as the spoon or the basin once were. Radiological services and medical photography are among the clearest signs that medicine learned to keep an image of itself. The object was not only seen, it was stored, compared, and later reconsidered. That is a modern habit, but it rests on an old one. The habit of making a mark and trusting the mark later. A plate, a print, a file, a lighted screen, all belong to the same long effort. They are ways of saying that the body can be examined without being reduced to a single glance. The ship carried that idea forward. What entered one room as a body could leave as an image, a number, a line, a case, a thing that could be studied again by another pair of eyes. The image could travel farther than the patient and still keep the body present in the work. That patient, repeatable attention is one of the true continuities of modern medicine. The operating rooms made another continuity visible. Older surgery did not vanish. It was gathered, narrowed, and surrounded by equipment. Everything had to be ready before the first motion began. The ship's operating rooms made that point clearly. A hospital ship is not a floating miracle. It is a set of rooms arranged so that the right work can happen in the right order. That order is itself part of the care. It keeps the rush from becoming confusion, the urgent from becoming careless, the crowded from becoming impossible to manage. Modern medicine built entire systems around that idea. The room, the tray, the light, the sterile field, the path in and the path out, each one is a reminder that skill depends on preparation. A difficult task stays difficult. The difference is that the institution has learned how to meet it. The different wards, from intensive care to recovery, from intermediate care to lighter care, show another continuity. Medicine learned to separate people not only by what a name on a page said, but by how much watching they needed and how much movement they could bear. That kind of sorting is old. What changed was the precision of the sorting and the size of the system. A ship makes the logic especially clear because space is limited. Every bed is an argument about attention. Every transfer is a decision about pace. Every open space says that someone else may arrive. Modern medicine still works by those decisions, whether the room is afloat or ashore. The language has changed, the equipment has changed, but the underlying question remains the same. Where does this person belong right now so that care can be given without waste? The distilling plants and oxygen-producing plants matter because they remind the listener that medicine is tied to hidden infrastructure. A hospital cannot be only white walls and uniforms. It needs water, clean water, drinking water, washing water, water for the rooms that nobody praises, water for the long hours when the ship is far from any harbor. It needs oxygen too, and the means of making it available when the work is urgent and the distance is wide. The older hospital depended on wells, cisterns, coal, servants, kitchens, and local trades. The modern ship depended on machines that turned seawater into supply. The principle is the same. Care rests on systems most people never see. The medicine itself may be measured in charts or procedures, but it survives because the hidden pipes and tanks keep answering. Laundry and the central sterile room are not glamorous rooms, but they may be among the truest heirs of hospital history. Linen had to be washed long before anyone used the word sterile. Instruments had to be kept ready long before they were sealed in packaging. The old bedside knew that cleanliness was not decoration. It was a form of order that spared trouble later. Modern medicine still depends on that understanding. A folded sheet, a wrapped tray, a clean surface, a cart sent back and forth through a side door. These are small actions that make large rooms usable. The ship carried them as plainly as any city hospital. In those rooms, the institution admits something simple and stubborn. Care is not only the grand act at the center, it is also the repeated preparation that lets the act happen at all. What also remained in modern medicine was breadth. The hospital stopped being only a place for fever or injury. It became a house that could gather many kinds of need: dental services, an optometry room and lens lab, physical therapy, burn care. Each is its own specialty, and each still shares the same larger grammar of receiving, assessing, and returning people to ordinary life. On a ship, this breadth is especially visible. The vessel becomes a little city of rooms, each with its own routine, yet all connected by corridors and clocks. Modern medicine did not abandon the old impulse to gather varied care under one roof. It enlarged it. The result is not simplicity. It is coordination, the difficult art of letting different kinds of attention sit beside one another without losing the person at the center. The morgue keeps the chapter honest. Hospitals are often described through rescue, but they also contain the quiet responsibility of accounting for death with dignity. The presence of a morgue on a hospital ship tells the same truth that older hospitals knew. Not everything can be turned, not every life can be brought through. Yet even then, the institution does not become a stage. It remains a place with records, coverings, names, and a final location for the body. Modern medicine still keeps that room, and in keeping it, admits that care is wider than cure. The room matters because it refuses to let the last outcome become anonymous. A hospital that can keep both urgency and solemnity is a more complete institution than one that knows only rescue. Casualty reception is another phrase that reveals continuity. The first room is not the last. A person arrives, is sorted, documented, and moved along a route chosen by urgency and capacity. On a ship, that route may pass through deck, passageway, ward, laboratory, operating room, or recovery space. The exact architecture changes, but the logic remains. Medicine is an art of passage as much as an art of intervention. The first task is not always to solve. Often it is to place a person where the next task can be done well. The ship made that lesson plain because every transfer had to be clean, quick, and understood. A narrow corridor could become a line of decisions. A doorway could become the place where one kind of attention ended and another began. Records and trust belong together. A hospital is not trusted because it is hidden. It is trusted because it can explain itself through consistent work. The name on the chart, the time on the page, the printed label, the stored result, the clear route, the signed handoff. These are not mere clerical habits. They are the public face of discipline. Older hospitals earned trust by routine. The modern hospital does the same, even when newer machines, newer tests, and newer language sit beside the old paperwork. On a ship, with the sea on one side and a line of patients on the other, trust depends on plain order. People forgive difficulty more readily than confusion. They can live with strain if the place still knows its own methods. Teaching remained too. Every room that accumulates records becomes a place where younger hands learn how older hands move. A chart is not only a chart, it is a memory of how attention was divided. A shelf is not only storage, it is a map of what the institution believes it may need tomorrow. Modern medicine still teaches this way, not only through lectures, but through repetition, correction, and the careful passing of responsibility from one shift to the next. The lesson is old. The next person must be able to find the thing without guessing. The room is therefore more than a room. It is a promise that knowledge will not stop with one set of hands. It will be handed across, checked, and used again. Night compresses all of that into sharper relief. In the dark, the room does not become dramatic. It becomes exact. The lamp shows the label. The hand finds the same drawer. The footsteps learn not to waste motion. The chart is checked again. The water is still there. The linen is still clean. The patient still needs watching. Modern medicine has more machines, more specialties, and more technical language, but its nights still depend on quiet labor and simple discipline. The sea helps reveal that truth because the sea leaves no room for performance. It asks for procedures that can be repeated in low light, with tired bodies, without losing accuracy. Midnight strips away anything that is only decoration. What remained in modern medicine was not one grand invention, but a way of building care out of rooms, routes, lists, and people who know their part. The hospital ship showed that the old hospital was not erased. It was carried into steel and given more machinery, more specialization, and more reach. The bedside remained, the ledger remained, the supply room remained. The idea remained that a patient is safer when the whole place is organized around the next necessary step. Someone records, someone cleans, someone counts, someone moves the cart, someone keeps the water moving, someone opens the room and waits by the bed until the next step is ready. That was the part that stayed. When morning came, the room was already prepared. That waiting had infrastructure behind it. A night ward depended on distilled water, oxygen, laundry, pharmacy shelves, sterile trays, radiology images, lab slips, and the careful movement of a stretcher through narrow passageways. On the hospital ship, the whole chain was visible. 12 operating rooms, 1,000 beds, a blood bank, a laboratory, dental services, burn care, physical therapy, and medical records all lived inside one steel body. The ship could make its own drinking water from the sea. It could keep a patient alive with oxygen produced on board, not borrowed from a distant city. It could keep an emergency long enough for the next decision to be made. That was the larger change in modern medicine. Care was no longer only a bedside skill. It was an institution of timing and trust, with each person responsible for a different kind of order. The surgeon needed the corpsman, the nurse, the pharmacist, the clerk, the technician, the mariner, and the cleaner. If any of them missed a step, the whole place felt the delay. If they all held their positions, the patient might never notice how much work stood between pain and relief. The sea made that truth plain. There was no hiding behind ornament, no room for waste, no extra space for confusion. Every drawer had a purpose. Every corridor had a direction. Every record had to be accurate because the next hand to read it might be standing under a red lamp at midnight. So what remained was not only the old hospital, but the old idea that medicine is a common discipline built from repeated acts of attention. The ship carried that idea into storms, ports, and crises on shore. It did not ask for heroics every hour. It asked for consistency. It asked for the bed to be changed, the instrument to be counted, the dose to be checked, the water to flow, and the note to be written before dawn. It asked for a place where a patient could still be received with order, even when the world outside was unsettled. In that quiet repetition, the modern hospital showed its oldest shape, and the night became a place where care could still be organized. A little before dawn, the ship seems to breathe differently. The engines keep their low rhythm, but the passages are quieter, and the lamps no longer feel quite so bright. Beyond the portholes, the black water begins to take on a thin gray edge. Inside, the ward remains held in place by hundreds of ordinary preparations. Linen is folded, a basin is emptied, a cart is returned to its alcove. One watch gives its knowledge to the next. The hospital does not stop while the sea changes color. It simply moves from one set of careful hands to another, carrying the unfinished work forward without disturbing the patients who are finally asleep. That handoff reveals what made a hospital ship more than a collection of treatment rooms. Every part depended on another part being ready at the right moment. Clean water had to reach the basin, light had to remain steady over the bed, supplies had to survive movement, food had to travel from galley to ward while the deck shifted beneath it. Waste had to move away without crossing the paths meant for care. The ship's medical purpose rested on this hidden choreography. No single task was grand enough to explain the whole institution, but together, the tasks created a place where order could endure, even when the floor itself would not remain still. The sea sharpened the meaning of distance. On land, a missing item might be fetched from another building. A specialist might arrive by road. A damaged service might be restored from outside. At sea, the ship had to carry more of its own answers. Its storerooms, workshops, kitchens, treatment spaces, and wards formed a compact world with little room for carelessness. This did not make the work dramatic every hour. More often, it made the work methodical. People checked what they had, protected what they could not replace quickly, and kept the route through the vessel clear for the moment when quiet routine might suddenly become urgent. Night also made professional boundaries feel less distant. A nurse listening beside a bed could hear the machinery of the vessel through the bulkhead. A mariner maintaining the ship's systems was also protecting the conditions in which care could continue. A cleaner restoring a passage, a cook preparing the next meal, and a technician checking a lamp all belonged to the same promise, though they approached it from different directions. The hospital ship made interdependence visible. Medicine could not float by clinical knowledge alone. It needed navigation, engineering, provisioning, sanitation, records, and the steady labor of people whose names might never appear in an account of a successful recovery. That is one reason the hospital ship has remained such a powerful form of care. It joins mobility to institution. The vessel can move toward a need, yet it must bring the habits of a hospital with it: separation, cleanliness, observation, supply, rest, and reliable handoff. The hull may cross great distances, but the patient still encounters care through close and familiar details. A blanket is straightened, water is offered, a question is answered softly, a lamp is adjusted so sleep can return. The vastness of the sea does not erase the bedside. It makes the bedside feel more deliberate, a small, protected place, carried through darkness by an entire ship. When morning finally enters the ward, it arrives first as a pale reflection in the portholes. Metal rails lose their amber glow, White linen takes on the cool color of the sky. Somewhere above, a door opens to the new air, while below, the last notes of the night are passed on. The ship continues through calm water or waits beside a harbor wall, but the essential work is the same. The ward remains ready, the route remains clear, one person stays connected to the next. Midnight has shown how much attention is required to make care seem peaceful. Dawn shows the result. A hospital still functioning, a patient still sheltered, and another day beginning in order.